Hello, hi, and welcome or welcome back to the Madness and Meaning podcast. We are going to be exploring all things spiritual awakening today, which we definitely have done in many episodes already. We were just talking about how we actually literally did an episode titled like Our Spiritual Awakening Journeys. And we want to try to make this episode distinctive in some way. And like most of our episodes recently, we're going to be exploring this really real time because both of us are just kind of going through this weird phase with this podcast where we kind of just enter it having no idea what we're going to be talking about or what
It's
we're
not
going to
a
say.
weird phase. It's our own sense of trust inside of who we are to be able to explore concepts in real time without the need of having any advanced
Yeah.
like notes or anything. So it is this podcast and our exploration in real time of these concepts is an indication of our own awakening process and an
Ooh, way to
exemplification of
tie
it.
it up there. Way to bring it full circle. But it is true. Like
Yeah.
I wanted to explore from the very beginning just to give context for like what I really want to explore with you today is essentially like what are some themes that we've picked up on that have been extracted from big pivotal moments in our lives, especially since we have been quote unquote spiritually awakening. Um, and just exploring these moments where like things really changed. Like we had a big realization about something, we made a connection of something, maybe we released something, we upgraded our perspective around something in a really big way that had a profound ripple effect on our lives. And for me, there's so many moments like that where it just feels like I'm just like entering the next level or the next phase of this journey that I'm on. Let's call it the spiritual awakening journey. And to give context for those moments and those experiences, and maybe some themes that we can see might be universal across this experience of awakening, quote unquote. I would like to explore like what even is awakening? Like what does it even mean? What is that journey? What is it leading us towards? What is the point of it? I guess if we can even come up with a point, because that feels kind of egoic in and of itself. But what is spiritual awakening? How would you even define that?
I can only speak to my own perspective with this. So that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, spiritual awakening is the journey back in, which is very different from how we've been told to view ourselves in the world and to show up inside of those experiences. Where growing up, we are so outwardly focused in everything that we do. Um, going to school and focusing on the schoolwork and getting good grades, and then from there getting a good job and making good money, and then finding positive relationships and partnership and then children. And through doing all of those things, we can feel satisfied and accomplished inside of who we are without ever really venturing a little bit deeper and peeling back those layers of who we are, why we are, what we want, why we want those things, and asking some of those deeper questions. And so, in my opinion, this spiritual awakening journey is about remembering that there's more beyond this human existence and beginning to contemplate it introspectively. And the way to do that is to turn in and begin to ask questions and reflect on them and feel all of the stuff that comes up inside of that. And as you do that, your consciousness expands and your perspective of yourself and the world around you and human existence changes. And that is essentially evolution. And that, in my opinion, is the evolutionary journey of spiritual awakening. It's the awakening to who you are beyond this limited perspective of you.
Yeah. Yeah. The awakening to who you are really, really resonates with me. I knew I was going to end up bringing Kyle Cease into this conversation because he's such a big part of this for me. So I'm just going to do it really early. He always like grounds in this work of like, I just want to know who I am. Like that is his number one priority in his life is to just actually find out the truth of who he is, and that's his guiding light. And it feels really resonant to me. There might be different ways of looking at it or wording it or experiencing it that resonate with other people, but um it does feel like the quote unquote awakening journey from when I can identify my first when I can identify it was first spiritually awakening, which I guess you could question, like, aren't we awakening our entire lives? I guess we
Right.
kind of are
Yeah.
in some way. But like that moment where it became conscious that like this was a shift that was taking place in how I was going to be viewing myself and the world around me and how things operate and what I was focusing on and what I was prioritizing, like that time in my life, which was my very ripe age of 20, 21 maybe, when this happened for me, it it did take me on a journey of basically stripping away all of these layers of who I believed myself to be and replacing them, not even replacing them, but just getting to the core of what's actually true about me. And every year I feel like I'm discovering that more and more and more as I learn about, you know, how things in my past and my childhood influenced me and protective patterns that I layered on to protect myself from pain or because I didn't feel worthy and all of these limiting beliefs and stuff like that. As I identify those things and I'm therefore by seeing it able to see kind of beyond it. Because I think a big part of this is like once you see that something is has been a part of your identity, it automatically feels like there's distance between you and that old identity just by the fact that you can see it. Because the fact that you see it means that you know that you're not it in a way. And a lot of being asleep, quote unquote, is like you don't even question it. It's just like, I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I'm like, this is who I am. I am this person with these limitations, and this is my past, and this is how people see me. But as soon as you see that that's how you're seeing yourself, it creates at least a crack of distance where you can be like, whoa, like I see where that was coming from, or I maybe saw, maybe I see what planted that seed for me, or why I created that belief, or who taught me that, or what taught me that. And because I can see that it was taught, or that it was something that I wasn't necessarily born with, but that came from a lived human experience, and it's like, well, then who was I before that?
I
Because
think
that's more who I am.
I think we might have just identified the first two phases of spiritual awakening
Yeah,
and the third by proxy. So the
sure.
first is living without a conscious awareness of why or who you are, and just
Mm,
kind of identifying with what you know and what you see and not thinking on a deeper level about it. And then the next step is creating this conscious awareness of your sense of identity and discovering that there's more and
mm,
seeing the gap and then
yeah.
exploring the gap. And then the third step is no longer needing to know who you are, but it's feeling who you are and feeling all of the things throughout inside of that conscious awareness. And
Yeah.
that's sort of where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
And it's no longer important for me to understand things because I get so much more visceral kind of information or experiences through feeling. And it's kind of created this nuance to the experience of who I am that I didn't know how to access before.
Hmm. Something that really stood out to me when you were describing that first phase, where it's like, I don't know why and who I am. And essentially what we're saying is that the journey ends up becoming an evolution of learning who you are. But I'm curious if you'll resonate with this. It feels like to me in those early stages of awakening, when you're transitioning out of like just having no conscious awareness at all, not knowing who or why or whatever, the first phase is really heavily focused on why. Not even who am I, but it's like, why am I here? what's my purpose? And I think a lot of the manifestation, spiritual awakening, like that baby content is what kind of focuses us in that direction a lot of the time. Because for me, like, and I think this is a pretty universal experience when you're first starting to question, how does the world work? Who am I? What, like, things are different than I always thought that they were, that I was taught that they were. Our introduction into that is like, our thoughts create a reality, manifestation. Like, we have more power than we thought. We can, create, we're creators, we can create whatever, and blah, 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 blah. And I think that that whole dialogue and um way of seeing things comes with this whole like trying to find my purpose, right? Like, why am I here? What is my purpose? What is the purpose of all of these things? Also, even focusing on, why did that trauma happen to me? What was the purpose of that?
How does
Right?
it all work? Yeah.
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 Which is a good phase of that journey. And I think that it definitely serves a lot of purpose in this awakening process, but I think you and I have both watched ourselves come further out of that, where we're less focused on trying to understand everything, trying to understand, like, why are things the way that they are, and why am I the way that I am, and why didn't I manifest this, and why did I manifest that, and trying to logically understand things into more of a phase of like everything is just everything and everything just is.
Well,
If
I
that makes
think
sense.
lending itself to what you're saying, that first phase seems to be about like what is. And the second phase seems to be what could be
Yeah.
instead.
Like, what is like a victim mentality in a
Well,
way.
it's like,
Like,
how does it all work? And where do I come from? And like how can I be, how can I show up inside of my purpose? Like what could my purpose look like, and what is it supposed to look like?
sure.
And all of those questions of like what is reality, and like what does it all mean
Okay.
with
Yeah.
without the without necessarily going into the coulds, because you're still trying to figure out, well, then, like, what is it? If it wasn't what I thought it was, then what is it?
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a very it's a very fun beginning, because all of a sudden your world opens to all of these new possibilities and concepts. And I think that there's both a lot of fear inside of it, and also a means of escaping a lot of the fear that you felt beforehand. I can speak to myself for that.
Hmm.
And slowly you start to navigate, okay, like what is this new reality, and who is this new person inside of it? And then you kind of transition to this next phase where you begin to focus less on like, what am I not manifesting, and what do I want to manifest, and why isn't it working, and why do I show up in this way, and how am I, what is this trying to teach me, right? To what could be possible for me, and how could this look differently, or what could be available for me, or how could I feel inside of this? And so you start to allow yourself to branch or expand beyond the what is to the potential of what could be, which is a
Yeah.
very interesting next phase to enter.
Yeah.
Pushes you.
Do you remember where you were, or like what that experience was like for you? What phase of life you were in when you entered that what could be?
I think the first two, well, my first phase was 33 years. Then my second phase was around the time when we started working together, when I hired you as my coach. And that's when all of this new awareness came to me, both through my Google wormhole I found myself in and all the books I was reading, but also through the
Yeah.
work you took me through, which
Hmm.
was a lot of what's there. Can you feel what's there? Can we inquire as to what's there? Why is it there? Where did it come from? So it was very present focus, also looking back.
Hmm.
And then I would say after our work together came to its conclusion is when I started looking beyond that to, well, I have all of this knowledge and I have all this awareness and all of this wisdom, but I still feel trapped by it. because I can't create something that feels resonant for me. And that's when I started giving myself permission to ask, well, if all of the boxes available to you don't feel like they fit, then you might have to create one.
Hmm.
And what could that look like? And that was a very scary, challenging kind of venture for me
Yeah.
to begin to explore. But I would say that it's only been in the last year or so
Hmm.
that I've begun to
Yeah.
very slowly tiptoe in.
It sounds like that's a moment of both having to really confront what
Yes.
all of your perceived limitations were and also being forced to expand beyond them.
Well, I think phase two, where you begin to become aware of this existence beyond human reality, highlights all of your perceived limitations
Yeah.
because you're still believing in them and now you're seeing them
Yeah.
where you couldn't see them before. And that's a very
Yeah.
uncomfortable place to live.
So uncomfortable because your mind starts like logically justifying that those limitations aren't true. And like my easy example of that would be a lot of us have an unworthiness wound. Like I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. There's something wrong with me. There's lots of different flavors that that wound can take on. And when we realize that that has been there, and we usually realize that that wound is there because we see, oh, like that's why I always hit this roadblock, or that's why I have this pattern in relationships, or that's why I made this decision to go in this direction in my career instead of doing the direction I actually wanted to do, et cetera, et cetera. That can come in a lot of different experiences, but we look back and we connect like, oh, I was believing that I'm not good enough or that there's something wrong with me. And that's why I created these experiences for myself that I'm now really deeply desiring to change and get out of. And so now that we see that we have that unworthiness wound or that limitation of I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, the mind kicks in automatically and is like, but I am. I am worthy. I am good enough. Like we hear the motivational talk in our own heads, and we can logically connect to this understanding that, like, look, like other people were good enough. Why can't I be good enough? And like we try to justify to ourselves that we are. And that for me was a really long, it felt like a very long phase of logically telling myself something wasn't true, but still fully in my body believing that it was and having this weird contrast going on where I was
That's
fighting myself.
fascinating because my experience was the opposite.
Okay,
That is fascinating because
interesting.
for me, I began to see my own limitations that I had been telling myself were true, that I didn't realize were like that. I didn't realize the stories consciously. And then all of a sudden, I realized them consciously, but I still believed them.
Yeah,
I didn't feel worthy of anything more than what I created. And it took me a long time to work through that.
yeah. Did you ever experience like at least like hearing justification or like understanding logically that those limitations were limitations, that they weren't like the whole truth? Like you could
Well,
kind of conceptualize it.
the limitation I think was projected onto, well, it's possible for that person because A, B, and C, where it's not possible for me because of XYZ. So I
Okay.
looked for ways to justify
Why it was
that what I
true.
believed was true. Yeah.
Interesting.
That was my pattern.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I also resonate with that. Like it came in phases
Right.
for me, where it was like, I'm on a motivational kick. I'm gonna create this life for myself and manifest and bust through all of my limitations and create the life beyond my wildest dreams and blah blah blah. And that's when I would tell myself, like, I am worthy. Like, look, I can do this. Other people have done it. I can do it. Why can't I do it? I'm good enough. Why wouldn't I be good enough? And like be able to conceptually
Sure. Yeah.
justify those things, but then something would happen, or I would
Right.
get disappointed,
Yeah.
or
You
I
kind of
wouldn't get what I wanted.
swing back and forth. Like, I
Yeah.
think I was justifying my limitations and then I was like, I don't need to do that anymore. And then I flipped to what you're talking about, where I was
Yeah.
buying into my limitlessness, but still kind of swinging back and forth when it didn't go my way. And I would like
Hmm.
revert back. Oh, you see, that's why I'm not worthy. And maybe this is evidence that that's not possible. Yeah,
Right. And I think all along, beyond the surface level thinking, I was always looking for to justify that what I believed about myself was true at the end of the day. I was more committed to proving to myself that these limitations were true than they weren't, unconsciously, more than anything. And I think that's a real point, is that like we would rather focus on proving it right because that feels comfortable, or at least then we're not going to be kidding ourselves. Like
I
if I'm
was
not
the
going to be
opposite.
okay.
I truly was trying to prove that my perceived limitations were wrong, but I didn't.
Consciously. Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
But beyond all of the conscious, like I hope that they're not true. I think that it felt more comfortable to like if at the end of the day, if it's true that I'm not good enough, I would rather know it.
yeah, yeah.
I don't want
I
to
would
kid
rather
myself.
have all the information about me than be delusional.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that's what I mean by I was beyond anything trying to prove that they were true because I needed to know. And I
yeah,
I would test it to see and when something like as an example, if I was working towards something and something didn't go my way, rather than just like being looking at it at face value to be like, okay, time to move on, or time to try something else, or that didn't work, that doesn't mean anything about me, it's just another thing that I need to do differently. It was like, oh my God, like it hit me so deeply where it's like, oh my God, like why doesn't anything work for me? And why does this keep happening to me? And it was like really like hitting on that wound of
right.
like maybe it's because maybe this is happening because
Yeah,
I'm not good enough because of this perceived limitation about myself. Not necessarily that I was telling myself that consciously. I don't
right.
think there was any moment where I was like, "Oh crap, maybe I didn't sign the client because I'm not good enough and I'm undeserving of a positive life." I think it was hitting that nerve more unconsciously and my emotional reaction to it and then how I would withdraw and get really swept away and take things really personally and have a really hard time like regulating myself to get back on track was a result of it feeling like it was more evidence to support this thing that I was terrified was true, but that my bias was, at the end of the day,
Right.
that probably was true.
And I think that this is where people linger inside of their awakening for a very long time. It's very, very, this is where the sticking point is, I think, to transcend that dynamic and
Yeah.
that area that you're living inside of, and to witness that it's literally all patterns of thought, just like
Mhm.
playing off of each other, and to create that further separation from your identity and the way that it's playing out, because you tend to identify with those quite strongly when you can finally see them, and you're trying to separate from them, but you can't. Why do you think that is?
Why is it so hard to separate from those patterns of thought?
Why is it so hard to transcend that part of the awakening where you can finally let all that go, and anything that doesn't go away, doesn't go your way, doesn't mean anything about you, and doesn't prove your limiting beliefs about you as true?
I think that there's something really comfortable about the certainty of discovering that you weren't good enough or admitting defeat to that being reality. Because at least there's a certainty of it. And there's also like I think there's so many different factors that I can see feeding into this, like even just the sole fact that if you were to transcend that experience and like wholeheartedly believe in your inherent worth and value and see yourself as like a limitless creator and a soulful being in this human experience, the sole fact that that would alienate you from the human experience a lot and from the communities that you grew up around a lot of the time and the relationships and the connections that you have. I think that's a part of it is just that there's an inherent threat that we can palpably sense inside of that transcendence towards a reality that one, we don't have any basis for, like it's conceptual until we're there.
Right.
We
I
might
think
read about it in books.
I think that's it. Like there's no
Yeah.
tangible groundedness inside of it, and you're being asked to just blindly trust and leap,
Yeah.
right? And that was that pivot point for me where I was doing the coaching thing and I was doing the channeling thing, and it wasn't feeling 100% right. And I wasn't fully making the money I wanted and having the impact I wanted. And ultimately, I was approaching those endeavors through that objective, which was to make money and to have impact. And that's what was keeping me stuck was because I wasn't making money and I wasn't having an impact and I didn't know what I was doing wrong. And I was again making that mean that I wasn't getting something. I didn't have the potential I needed. Maybe this isn't my purpose after all. Maybe I'm just flawed in some way, rather than asking myself, if this doesn't feel right, what could feel right? And beginning to explore complete unknowns.
Mhm.
And it took a long time to give myself permission to do that because I don't think we're taught how.
No. And you learned how.
Right. I learned
Yeah.
how through failure after failure after failure and dealing with all of the shame inside of it, is quite frankly.
Yeah.
How? Yeah.
Yeah. And what is the how?
If I had been successful at any of those things prior, I wouldn't be here today.
Right.
I just want to put that out there because it's really hard to walk away from the significance inside of traditional forms of success because that's a big
Amen.
that's a big
Yeah.
driver for me is a feeling of significance. Um,
Okay, can we just take a pause for that for a moment? Because I think that is something that I'm realizing for myself too. And maybe it's just a story I'm telling myself to make myself feel better about the way that my journey worked out, but I don't think so. I think that there is legitimate truth to how you and I's experiences are parallel, where you and I have both had the experience of never actually reaching the level of success that we wanted, trying really hard to get there, doing all the quote unquote right things and comparing ourselves to where other people were and trying to figure out where we should be on that journey comparatively because of how much time and effort we put into it so far and all the work that we're doing and blah 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 and just always feeling like we were never getting out of it, out of anything that we were doing that we we should have from what we could conceptualize. And that's such a grounding point for me to realize that, like, first of all, at this point, it's so obvious to me how important significance is. Like significance to feel special, to feel good enough, to feel validated. Like that is one of the biggest, probably the biggest driving point in my life. For you and I both. We've discovered that for ourselves. And my life path, my spiritual awakening path, just would have been so tremendously different if I had gotten the success that I wanted, because it would have, the lessons wouldn't have been how to like do the work to feel worthy and feel significant in myself, which I feel like is what I've been, working on. It would have been like the main lesson would have been how can I walk away from something that's giving me everything that I thought that I wanted, just because there's this weird feeling saying that I should, which I think is what that's a lesson that people that do get a lot of success end up having to learn is like, I got everything I thought that I wanted and I'm still not happy. So now what?
what I learned was going from stage 2 to stage 3 requires a paradigm shift. And
Hmm.
what that looked like for me was I was trying to find significance through creating something with the goal of money and clients.
Yeah.
But the paradigm shift to transcend that paradigm was no longer having the goal of making money and getting clients. And the goal was very different. It was to create something for the joy of creating it.
Yeah.
And that required me to let go of the attachment to receiving significance through the validation outside of me and to
Uh-huh.
self validate.
Yeah.
And that's how it happened. And I had to give myself permission to let go of making money and getting clients. And when I was able to do that, I was able to create something for me and not for getting a client a great outcome so that I could get more clients and get more money.
Right, 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 right. Yeah.
And I think that is really hard in our society because we need money and we need clients.
Uh-huh.
And I'm very fortunate that I have a support system that allows me to sit inside of my creativity in a way where I don't have to put pressure on it to produce.
Right.
And that was how I was able to ask myself what could be rather than trying to make what is work.
Yeah. And just as a side tangent to that, I think it's kind of interesting to think about how like this is blatantly different in different like different people's experience of entrepreneurship and success because there's some people who when they have the pressure to create money and to provide for themselves and become significant in some way through their work and to get the external validation that it actually works for them that like they have
Their
that
lesson is
same wounding
different.
that we do their lesson is different.
Yeah.
Yeah, because for me the more unworthy I'm feeling the more desperate I am to get external validation and create something the further away I push it every time every time.
Well, that lends itself to stage three, which is felt sense. And essentially, the spiritual awakening is accessing a state of being that you couldn't before. And a state of being is how you feel inside of you. And it is through letting go of attachments that you needed to access a feeling and now being able to access it regardless, which is kind of what comes from letting go of the need to make money and earn clients. Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
Yeah,
And that state of being is accessed for different people in different ways. But for me, it was accessed that way.
right. Same.
Yeah.
I
It's
I
however it's accessible for that person and that soul.
true. And that soul, right. And what exactly the life path and the journey and the lessons and how you wanted to experience those lessons. Because the way you experience them does kind of change the lesson in and of
Yeah.
itself too. Even if the entire lesson of the human experience might if and I don't know if this is true, but it might just be like to find love or to realize that you are love or something like that. But there's micro lessons that lead to that experience and that get build upon the last one, et cetera, et cetera. And it's so interesting to see how like easy it is for us to compare where we're at to other people who are getting more success or getting the validation and being like, why didn't like I still struggle with that where I'm like, how come they were able to create so much more and they've been in this for less time than me and working on it way less hard than me and they've been and they're also like less conscious or whatever. I'm judging, but like,
Yeah.
having all of these comparisons of like logically I should be further along than them and I'm not, and to get swept up in that comparison when in reality, it's like who am I to say that this is that it should be any different than it is, or that I would have been better off had I had a different hand.
And again, looking at it that way, which is how I looked at it for a while,
Yeah.
is looking at it through that paradigm of I can only access the state of being that I want to, aka significance, self-love, if I receive the outward form of success, right? And
Yeah,
for those people, they might have received the outward form of success that we wanted and that they wanted, but that doesn't mean they were able to access the state of being that they wanted to feel inside of it. So they might not feel significant inside of it despite the outward appearance of it. They might not feel fulfilled inside of it despite us looking at them and saying they have everything I've ever wanted. How could that be possible?
so
And
true.
that's something that I understood logically for a long time, but didn't allow
Yep.
myself to truly believe. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, 100%. Thank you for putting words to that. Because it's so easy to be like, oh, the grass is always greener. And like people that are successful aren't happy. And like we know that conceptually, like that money and success and whatever doesn't automatically mean that they're happier. Like, so it's so easy to know that.
Right.
Yet to like live as if that's true, that also took me a long time. And I think I still oscillate back and forth between it, but I think it feels more as an embodied truth now than ever before.
When I started to fully allow myself to believe that that was true was when I started to watch people who are more successful than me reject me, block me, unfollow me, and then I could feel their frustration with me. And all I was over here with no money and no clients being like, what's their problem? They have everything that I want. Why are they so why are they so bothered by my presence?
Yeah.
And that could have been because they didn't get what they wanted out of those experiences. And they were looking at me thinking probably that I was so successful and I had all the clients because of my outward appearance of confidence or levity or authenticity that they were kind of believing that the grass was always greener,
Yeah. They saw something in you that they were not letting themselves embody so much.
as was
And
I.
they right. But
Yeah,
they had themselves trapped inside of a box of like, again, what we were just talking about. It's like, I've reached this level of success being this way, so I have to stay this way even though
right.
there was something that they were seeing in you, whether it was an authenticity or an ease or a stepping outside of the box or talking about things that you want to be talking about without having to curate them or, not having it be as structured as maybe they are. And they saw that and they wanted that, or a part of them felt resonance to that, but they felt like they couldn't access that because of the level of success that they've created doing it their way.
Right. So here we were, two sides of the fence, looking at the other person, thinking they had the thing that we were lacking, and that if only we could have that thing, then we could feel the way we wanted to.
Yes.
And that's what allowed me to finally be like, wait, what if I'm okay?
Right.
What if I could be totally and utterly okay? And what if I don't need that? Because
Yeah.
clearly it's not doing what for them what I'm believing it is.
Yeah. That feels like a really easy access point to jump into this other transition or experience that I feel was really hugely paradigm shifting for me inside of my life and inside of my journey. Just something that's continuing to evolve, but it's essentially around this idea of releasing control. We'll just label it as that because I feel like my journey, and I've talked about this in other episodes, has been just me getting more and more and more lessons to soften my grip of control on my life over and over and over again. And when you were just mentioning, like, what if I'm okay? I distinctly remember this part of my life. I was probably like 23 at this point when I had gone through an experience of trying really, 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 really hard to control something and gripping onto it and perfecting it and like just trying to control the outcome with every possible method and strategy that I could muster up the energy to use and to perfect. And then it didn't go the outcome didn't happen the way that I wanted it to. And then going through this huge like lost phase where I'm like, what the fuck? And just like nothing is working and just feeling completely out of control. And then being in a lot of suffering and a lot of pain, and then having that be processed and moved through it and then released it, and then accessing some moments of joy or having some good things happen to me or having moments of peace or realizing, oh, maybe what I thought I wanted, I didn't want anymore. And it was kind of that cycle happened, which it had happened before, but it happened in a very exaggerated and dramatic way where it was like I couldn't just overlook it. And I remember just being there, sitting there and being like, oh my God, like I'm okay. Like even in the moments where I didn't think that I was going to be okay because it was like I lost all control and nothing was working and everything that I was afraid was going to happen started happening all at once. And even though all of that happened, like I still breathed air. I still had moments of peace. I still, like, the sun still shined on my face. Like, I still had moments where I was laughing until I was crying. It was like, wow, like, what if, it felt like such a pivotal moment where I was like, ah, okay, so I don't actually have to worry as much as I have been. Because up until that point, whenever I would have fears of bad things happening, I would really feed into them as if, like, if those things were to happen, I will not be okay. I need to make sure that those things never happen because if they do, I wouldn't be okay. And then just learning the lesson over and over and over again, and then having the moment of being willing to trust that, like, I will always be okay. And that has stuck with me since that point in my life. Doesn't mean I haven't had moments of anxiety or feeling way out of control and freaking out, but the groundedness feels evolved. The place where I land after all of that, it feels like even if my mind might be in chaos and I might be freaking out and I might be like, why isn't anything going my way? Blah, 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 blah. The access to that truth of safety inside of myself has never left me since then. And that has been truly life-changing.
That I think is phase three. If we're looking
Yeah.
at the phases that we sort of identified, unconsciousness to awareness to like the felt embodied sense of it, to me, that's what that is. It's no longer seeing your awakening as this linear process of what is my purpose, understanding my purpose, following my purpose, realizing my purpose, doing my purpose. And if my purpose is my purpose, then that means it's going to bring me lots of success and I'm going to have lots of money and I'm going to feel really significant. And
Right.
finally realizing that that's perhaps not it. And perhaps what it is feeling self-trust, feeling love, feeling joy, feeling all of these things that you didn't allow yourself to feel in the previous two phases, regardless of the situation.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm just
I've also I've recently come to look at it through these three phases through a slightly different perspective too, where it's like phase one is you are just inside of your human experience and you don't see anything other than that. It's just your human thoughts and feelings and awareness and perceived limitations. And you don't really think about anything else, but you're very identified with that. And that's all there is. And then phase two is you become aware of something beyond that. And you become aware that you have a soul and you have a higher self, but you still see them as outside of you and you keep looking to them for guidance. Where should I be? What is my path? What does it look like? Help me get there. Because there's a part of you that still doesn't fully trust in you. And you feel like you have to change who you are in order to access their state of being and their consciousness and their
I
energy. And you have to get rid of your humanness in
get rid
order
of
to
the ego.
become your soul self. Exactly. Get rid of your ego, shed this lesser version of you to change you to become a better version of you. And then phase three is recognizing that your higher self is you. You are one and the same. and they are a part of you that's inside of you already, and they just love you unconditionally. And the only way to open up to more of that version of you is to do the same thing. And it's actually a partnership of human and soul coming together to assist one another inside of that process. And I think we get stuck in this phase too because it taking that leap of self-trust when you don't have all the pieces and you can't see the clear path ahead of you is very scary to the human part of us.
Uh-huh.
And that paradigm shift does require time.
Yeah. I wanted to speak to that experience in the awakening process where you do feel like in order to transcend or to become, to manifest better or whatever it is, like you need to get rid of the ego. There's aspects of yourself that you need to break off of, that need to go away, that you need to stop listening to, the negativity, the limitations, the ego perspective, the trauma brain, the patterns. There is this paradigm that I think is just so normalized and prevalent inside of any self-development or spiritual awakening journey and the content that we consume when we're on that journey that says that certain ways of thinking or certain ways of being in the world are wrong. And if you want to have a better life and spiritually awaken and feel happy, truly happy and be at peace, then you need to essentially get rid of the ego. And lots of different ways of saying that. Stop thinking so negatively, stop feeling these negative feelings, stop comparing, stop being judgmental, stop feeling unworthy. And all of these experiences and thought patterns that we have inside of ourselves then have a layer of judgment slathered on top of them, which ironically takes us further away from what we were told we were going to get if we got rid of those things. Because the reality is we can't just get rid of any of that. It's a part of the human experience. Having a human brain, having an ego that has been developed based on our life experiences that taught us that pain is this direction and pleasure is this direction, and we need to move away from pain and towards pleasure. And here are all of the strategies that we've learned in order to do that that end up creating a lot of problems in our life. And usually we can start to see those problems, but by seeing them as problems and making them wrong and telling ourselves that until I transcend this or until this goes away, I'm not there yet. This is my job to have to get rid of these aspects and patterns and parts of me, I think is a part of the spiritual awakening journey that is necessary. But there's a phase where you start to realize that, and I think that this word is going to resonate with that felt sense phase that you're talking about, where it's coming into acceptance of all of it. Acceptance feels really resonant of that phase that you're describing, where rather than, waking up and trying to get somewhere else, trying to get rid of these lower vibrational things so that we can rise, it's like we're coming back into ourselves and we're integrating all of it and we're allowing and welcoming the entire human experience, the bad, the ugly, the judgmental, the painful, the suffering. We're starting to release our judgment or our wrongness on those things and welcoming them and integrating them and seeing them as like, this is just part of why I'm here, is to experience this.
Yeah, I do think that the spiritual awakening kind of traditional conversation, I don't even know if it outwardly expresses this, but it's sort of the interpretation, which is that we need to take all that stuff inside of our human experience and get rid of it because it's holding us back and blocking us from whatever's next, which is going to be better than what is. But it's
Yeah.
actually the embracing of all those things, which is the way forward. And it's not forward, it's in. Ascension isn't up and out, it's in. it's
Yes.
it's it's the embracing of all of those things and realizing that there was never a wrongness inside of them. It was just your interpretation of you that was creating the belief system of wrongness and the discomfort you were feeling in the first place. And it's actually possible to feel all of that stuff through a compassionate lens and shift it so that it's no longer uncomfortable. Because when you can
Yeah.
allow yourself to be who you are without feeling like you have to change who you are, that's acceptance. And unconditional acceptance is what your higher self feels for you. And if ascension into becoming your higher self is ultimately what you want, then unconditionally loving you is the way.
Yeah. And I want to draw this parallel between as you're as you're beginning to accept all parts of you and really just coming into your wholeness, like integrating all parts of you, not breaking off, not rejecting, but just like allowing all of it, like not making yourself wrong for being judgmental, not making yourself wrong for having negative thoughts or being afraid or holding yourself back or feeling unworthy or feeling not good enough sometimes or judging other people, like not making yourself wrong for all of that, but just seeing that as just a part of your human experience that you get to bring love and acceptance to, or that you can choose to bring love and acceptance to because you see that not bringing love and acceptance to it wasn't doing anything beneficial anyways. There's a parallel that I've found in that process of how that begins to create an immense amount of freedom for what you experience externally. And what I mean by that is because you're no longer afraid of parts of you or making parts of you wrong, you kind of stop making life experiences and things that could happen to you wrong, which to me feels very parallel with this release of control because the reason why I would control something is because I'm telling myself that this outcome is good, this outcome is bad. This should happen, this shouldn't happen. If this does happen, I won't be okay. If this does happen, I will be okay. And
Or I will be wrong, or I
right,
will be right. Yeah.
totally. Yeah. And my journey to releasing control has really coincided with my journey of meeting all parts of myself with acceptance. And I've had a moment very recently, I was telling you about this the other day, that felt like it was like check mark, like entering the next phase of spiritual awakening for me. It felt like a really, really, really big, um, like pivotal moment for me. And again, I'm going to bring back Kyle Cease. So Kyle Cease, he has this part of his story that he references quite often around a time in his life where he essentially claimed to source, God, the universe, whoever, said, merge me with my soul, no matter what the cost, which essentially saying, like, I want to know who I am. I want to spiritually awaken. Like my path here as a soul living a human experience and evolving is my number one priority. And whatever needs to take place in order for me to get there, I'm ready for it. Like, I'm not going to resist it. I welcome it with open arms. It doesn't matter if that causes immense pain, if you remove people from my life, if bad things like what's most important to me is knowing myself. And I am willing to hold myself through whatever experiences need to happen in order for that experience to evolve the way that it's meant to. And I remember hearing him talk about that and how tremendously valuable and pivotal that was in his life. And I could recognize, like, wow, the freedom in that, and wow, like the value inside of having the courage to exclaim that this is your number one priority. And I felt the resonance of it. I really desired to claim that for myself too, because I could feel the resonance of I'm here to know who I am too. I'm here to be on this path of discovering who I am and just that spiritual awakening path is so palpable for me and I can feel the purpose of it. At the same time, I was like claiming that I want to merge with my soul no matter what the cost is terrifying. Like so terrifying that I can't bring myself to even think about saying that out loud or saying it and claiming it to myself or to whoever because my mind automatically went into all of these worst case scenarios where it was like, well, what if to merge with my soul? Or what if to spiritually awakening, I'm going to have to go broke. I'm going to have all the people in my life that I love taken away from me. I'm going to get into a major accident and become disabled. I'm never going to sign another client ever again. My business is going to corrupt. Everyone's going to hate me. I'm going to become a drug addict. Like, I'm going to be homeless. Like, all of these worst case scenario experiences that I was translating to, what if that's what it's going to take for me to quote unquote merge with my soul? I can't do that. It's not worth it to me. I was like, nope, like if that's what it takes, I'm okay. Like, even though I see the value of going down that path and could maybe even see, like, well, if those things were to happen, like they would lead to something beautiful at the end of them. I was like, but I can't. I didn't have the courage to trust myself enough to hold myself through those experiences. And this was years ago. I remember first hearing Kyle mention that this was something that he claimed, and he references it a lot in his content. And very recently, like sometime in the last few weeks, I was just on a walk and my mind was going and whatever. And I remember just like thinking about that, thinking about like merge me with my soul no matter what the cost. And remembering how terrifying that was. Remembering it was like, I can't do that, like because I don't want all of those worst case scenarios to happen. If that's what it's going to take, like, no, thank you. I would rather just stay where I'm at and not resonating with that fear anymore. And really just feeling this overwhelming sense of like actually what's most important to me is to know myself, is to be in this human experience and learn and grow and evolve and to get closer to love and to shed the parts of me that aren't true and to get closer to what is true. And I don't care what has to happen in order for me to get there.
And in that moment, you did. Do you see that?
No.
They're saying that it's not the bad things happening that free you. It's no longer fearing the bad things happening that does.
Got it. Yes.
You don't have to suffer in order to be able to access, I guess, what can we call it? Ascension, enlightenment, whatever it is that we're talking about,
Yeah.
that kind of joining with your soul self. It is freeing yourself of the painful thoughts of who you might be and who you might become inside of that reality and
Yeah.
accessing the freedom that you felt in that moment now.
Yeah. The freedom and the safety of just
Yeah.
like, even if that were to happen, like, I know I'm held. I know that at the core of who I am is where I find my safety, and that will never be taken from me. And I could just feel that, like, even in the depths of like the absolute worst case scenario happening, I could find myself back to truth, back to safety inside of me. And that wasn't a concept. It was like, yeah.
It was a felt sense that you had already arrived,
Hmm.
which you did.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that is what I mean by it that third phase is this felt sense. It's not the reality that creates your experience of embodying your higher self. It's your state of being that does. And you were able to access that state of being of that sense of self-trust and self-freedom in that moment. And so in that moment, you did.
Yeah. And I could just feel the freedom and the shift inside of that. And this is very new to me, but I feel like, yeah, this is the phase of like actually figuring out what true safety, what true trust, what true freedom really is in this human experience. And it's not conceptual anymore. It's like and it's not circumstantial either. I think that's a big definition to make is that like my safety, my freedom was not found in getting to some circumstance that I've decided in my mind represents being free, being safe, being secure, like in some ways, yeah, my life is great. In other ways, it feels very insecure and very unfree and uncertain and all of that. And it doesn't matter. The circumstances feel completely irrelevant to the truth of that safety and that freedom that I've accessed. And similarly to where I found that after that phase of like massive like control and trying to figure out the outcome and doing everything that I could to perfection to be a perfectionist to get the outcome to be a certain way and it didn't happen and I went through the whole releasing process of that and freaking out and then being like okay I was okay even though that happened and feeling that sense of safety that stuck since then. I was like 23 at that time. It feels like that has just happened again but it's landed deeper. And I think that is kind of what the journey is like, is learning the same lessons, but taking you deeper into them and deeper into the truth.
For me, my current stage of my spiritual awakening is accessing the state of being, regardless of my circumstances, because ultimately how you feel dictates your reality. And I think up until stage three, we see it the opposite way. Our circumstances dictate how we feel, and that creates our reality. And when you can flip it and you can see that you dictate how you feel, and so your reality is a byproduct of how you feel about you, you realize that you can access or embody your entire, higher self's state of being by simply allowing yourself to.
Yeah. And I think that you'll resonate with this too. I think that the further along that journey you go, the less you even care about creating a different
Right.
life as well. Like it's not like
Yeah.
I'm going to feel better and I'm going to like feel love and feel joy and feel freedom regardless of my circumstances and then like cross my fingers and hope that my circumstances change as a result of it. You know,
Right.
that was a part of the journey too. But now it's like whatever the circumstances are meant to be. And like there's it doesn't mean that there's not moments where I'm like, I hope that this happens and I'm get really attached to an outcome. Like, of course, I still have that. I have it noticeably less,
Well, you can want it without needing it.
the attachment. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you feel is on your heart with this topic or that we didn't get to?
Hmm. Nothing that jumps out at me right away, to be honest.
I feel like I feel complete with this.
Yeah, me too.
I think that your spiritual awakening journey is going to look different. Like everyone's is going to look different. And ultimately you get to decide where you are on that in that side of that process and how it feels for you. And I don't think there's anyone outside of you that can tell you what it's supposed to look like, where you're supposed to be, and what it's meant to be other than you. And you get to determine that for yourself, which is part of the beauty of it.
Mhm. Love it.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. This was a fun conversation, and we'll
So
see you next
fun.
time.